Добрый день, глубоко уважаемые коллеги.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues and guests. Today is the 6th of April, 2022, so 1500 hours. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council for the Defense of Physics by Strakevich and Alekseevna, the degree of candidate of Political Sciences, specialty 554 International Relations, on the theme Prospects of Transnational Cooperation, Extreme Right, Populist Parties, on the example of Alternative for Germany and the Austrian Freedom Party. By the order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University, Gniorov Alexander Valentinich, dated the 20th of January 2022, number 302, me, Kostuk Ruslan Vasilyevich, Doctor of History, Professor of the Department of Theory and History of International Relations of St. Petersburg, was appointed Chairman of the Decision Council. Other members of the Council were appointed with the same order. Let me introduce them to Sungurov Alexander Yurovich, Doctor of Political Science, Professor, Department of Political Science International Relations of St. Petersburg branch of the National Research University Higher School of Economics. In the remote access mode we have Vasilyeva Natalia Alekseevna, Doctor of Philosophy, I'm here, Professor of the Department of World Politics of St. Petersburg University, Natalia Alekseevna. Can you see and hear us? Yes, all is well, thank you. Zeleneva Irina Vladimir, Doctor of History, Associate Professor of the World Politics Department of St. Petersburg University, Irina Vladimirovna. Can you see and hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you, thank you. And Aspanova Aigerim Nuralivna, Doctor of Political Science, Associate Professor, Head of the Department of Regional Studies, Gumilov Eurasian National University, Kazakhstan. Aigerim Nuralivna, can you see and hear us? Yes, I can see and hear you very well, thank you. The degree applicant, Strakevich Anastasia Alekseevna, is also present. Also, the degree the applicant thesis supervisor is present. Candidate of History, Doctor of Political Sciences, Yeremina Natalia Valerievna, Professor, Department of European Studies at the University. In order to improve quality of communication, dear colleagues working in the remote access mode, please switch off your microphones, but remember to turn them on when you're given the floor. Let me also inform you that our session is being recorded and broadcast live at St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English or from English into Russian. During the live broadcast of the council session, at the moment an email is displayed to which all the listeners may send their questions to the applicant or express their opinion regarding the content of the thesis and the applicant's speech, the current scientific discussion, and thus take part in the discussion. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical support service. Questions should be related strictly to the applicant's speech and the content of her thesis. It's necessary to indicate full name, position, and place of employment of the author. Questions that are not related to the scientific discussion of the thesis, the text and assessment of the thesis, as well as anonymous questions, should not be presented. In accordance with the order of awarding degrees of Candidate of Sciences and Doctor of Sciences at St. Petersburg University, approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, a session of the Dissertation Council shall be considered competent if at least 2/3 of the appointed members are present, but not less than 4 persons. Our council consists of 5 members. All 5 are present, including 3 council members in the remote interactive mode. Audio-visual contact has been established with them. Thus, we have the quorum. I invite the Dissertation Council Activities Support Department Officer, Curator of today's department, to draw up the attendance list. Let me set forth the following procedure of today's session with approximate duration of 2 hours. First, summary report of the chairman on the applicant and documents submitted by the applicant and their compliance with applicable regulations. Answers to possible questions, approximately 5 minutes. Second, summary report of the applicant outlining the key points of her research. Approximately 15 minutes. Questions to the applicant strictly on her report. Answers of the applicant not more than 5 minutes. 5. Presentation of external reviews, if any. Speeches of all the council members in turn with their assessment of the thesis and the applicant's speech, as well as their questions and suggestions to the applicant. Approximately 10 minutes per each speaker. 7. Speech of the chairman with his assessment of the thesis, approximately 10 minutes. Answers of the applicant to questions and remarks of the council members, not more than 20 minutes. Open discussion. Speeches at will of the attendees with summaries of their positions and or specific questions and suggestions to the applicant strictly on the theme of the study, not more than 2 minutes per speaker. At that, all the speakers are kindly requested to register themselves and introduce themselves, and giving their full name, position and place of employment. 10. Questions to the applicant received during the ongoing scientific discussion during the live broadcast of the council session at the Petersburg University website. Questions. Presentation of each takes more than 2 minutes, shall not be presented. Answers of the applicant, not more than 2 minutes per each question. Speech of the applicant's thesis supervised, not more than 3 minutes. 13. Discussion of the council members before open individual voting. For that period, sound shall be switched off. 14. Open individual voting. Votes shall be counted by the chairman. The results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. 15. Make a decision on awarding, not awarding, the degree. And closing remarks for the applicant, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions or objections to this procedure? If there are no questions, let us proceed. First, please switch off your mobile phones. Dear colleagues working in the remote mode, please keep your mobile phones on so we could reach you quickly in case of emergency. Let's start the session. I'll start with my summary report, the thesis by Strakevich and Alekseevna for the degree of candidate of political science, specialty 554, international relations, on prospects of transnational cooperation of extreme right-wing populist parties on the example of Alternative for Germany and the Austrian Freedom Party, was accepted for defense by the order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University dated the 30th of December 2021, number 24/7/1. Strakevich Anastasia Alekseevna wrote her thesis at St. Petersburg University as a doctoral student. Her thesis supervisor is candidate of historical science, doctor of political science, professor of the Department of European Studies at St. Petersburg University, Natalia Valerievna. The number of publications which set forth the key points according to the enclosed list is 3. In peer-reviewed journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Science and Education of Russia, 3. All the documents submitted by the applicant according to information are received from the curator of today's defense, comply with the university requirements that are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are also available from the Dissertation Council Activity Support Department officer, who is now present. Before I give the floor to the applicant, I have a question for the council members. Dear council members, do you have any general questions to the applicant? And is it necessary to review the entire list of documents submitted by the applicant? No. No, we don't have any questions. I see. Thank you. Then, summary report of the applicant. Anastasia Alekseevna, you have 15 minutes. Welcome. Thank you very much. Dear council members, the topic of my study is prospects for transnational cooperation between the extreme right-wing populist parties, the case of Alternative for Germany and the Austrian Freedom Party. Although the term populism was coined in 1960s, it was not explored by the Western European researchers until the mid-1990s. At the turn of the century, a phenomenon previously thought to be associated with backward agrarian societies began to be associated with radical right-wing parties emerging in developed countries. Success of populists over the past 2 decades raises fears of a right-wing wave. Right-wing populists are beginning to be perceived as exogenous to national political systems, reinforced by cross-border contacts. The present study focuses on the interaction between the German and Austrian right-wing populists and their prospects for cooperation, which has hardly been explored in the academic literature. The focus is on both formal, institutionalized cooperation and informal formation of identities and shared perceptions, aspects of the interactions. The aim of the study is to establish to which extent the views of such parties contribute or hinder effective cross-border contacts between them. In order to achieve this objective, a number of challenges to be met, the most important of which are: review the variety of approaches to the concept of populism, correlate the right-wing populism with the related categories such as right-wing radicalism, fascism, and Euroscepticism to identify trends in the interpretation of the right-left dichotomy, analyze the formation of right-wing populist forces in Germany and Austria, examine the practice of interaction between the parties and their positions on issues which have a transnational component, and finally identify trends in the development of relations between the parties in question. The theoretical basis for this study is the constructivist theory, in its particular emphasis on the constructive role of perceptions formulated in the works of Alexander Wendt, and the texts produced by actors as reflections and rules according to which they organize social reality, as said by Nicholas Ornoff and Friedrich Kratochvil. It should be noted that the choice of theoretical framework has been a common research strategy in recent years. Such a theoretical model is convenient for the analysis of fluid network structures, which are, on the one hand, virtual groups of citizens who share populist ideas at the national level, and on the other, cross-border populist associations. Comparative analysis, searching for common features and differences in both developmental trajectories and rhetoric between German and Austrian right-wing populist parties, which ultimately leads us to the conclusions about their identification patterns and the possibility to form a cross-border community, and content analysis of party-produced texts. The use of content analysis is largely motivated by the desire to cover as much data as possible reflecting the public communication characteristics of the Austrian Freedom Party and the Alternative for Germany. The selected material was analyzed with the help of the content analysis software MaxQDA. Several groups of materials form the basis of my study. The policy documents issued by Alternative for Germany and the Freedom Party for national elections, elections in individual federal states, and elections to the European Parliament, materials from the party's official websites and their social media pages, materials from the media, transcripts of sessions of German and Austrian national parliaments and the European Parliament, statistical data, and information on election results. As was mentioned at the beginning of today's speech, interest in populism dates back to 1960s, when the two main approaches to populism emerged, viewing it either as a past-oriented ideology or as a movement of social strata feeling oppressed. Traces of both concepts can be found in later studies, but the boundary between them is very tentative. In the 1990s, populism began to be discussed in the context of European developments. Thus, the attention of researchers is attracted by activities of Jean-Marie Le Pen in France, the attempt of which was an attempt to appeal to the people as a broad non-class and non-ideological community and calls for radical break with the existing system. In year 2004, Kusmat, who is probably the most famous theorist of populism today, published an article titled Populist Zeitgeist, in which he formulates the classic characteristics of the phenomenon. The author identifies two features of the populist rhetoric: the division of the society into true people and corrupt elite, and the call to turn politics into an expression of the will of the people. The critical tradition of the perception associated with the name of Leclerc, who believes that features attributed to populism are, I beg your pardon, populism has features inherent in many socio-political relations, but only some of them are labeled as populist and therefore unreasonable. In the 2010s, Paolo Gerbauda formulated the concept of populism 2.0, which sees social media as means of populist parties to appeal directly to the people. In Russian studies, interest in the concept of populism refers mainly to the post-Soviet period. Russian authors, like their Western colleagues, know that anti-elite protest components of populism, its propensity for simple solutions and loud statements. At the same time, domestic studies of populism are much stronger in the critical tradition developed by, among others, Sergei Lantsov, Galina Lukyanova, Olga Safonova. Nor is the question of cross-border interaction of the extreme right new to political science, since right-wing populism is mentioned as a flexible term. In interaction with the category of right-wing radicalism, a number of relevant studies in this context are based on right-wing radical material. An example of such work is the work of Richard Stoss, who suggests that what unites right-wing radicals, the desire for autonomy and reliance on charismatic leaders, ultimately also generates conflicts between them. Dmitry Almeida also writes about the limited formal interactions, pointing to the link between the state of a particular right-wing populist group and its international aspirations. In contrast, Benjamin Declean and Karsten Grabov speak of cross-border populism from a constructivist perspective, pointing to the possibility of cross-border commonalities and shared notions of the other, such as European official or immigrant. In the third chapter of this thesis, we analyzed trajectories of right-wing populist forces in Germany and Austria. The main point that draws attention is the different status of the parties. Although right-wing radicalism and right-wing populism took its baton since the first decades since World War II in Austria, it was traditionally the Austrian Freedom Party that held the monopoly position in this part of the political, while in Germany the right-wing populist forces succeeded each other. Although the positions of traditionally perceived as more radical, the Austrian political system has fully accepted as an integral part of it, even when the slogans were interpreted as anti-democratic by broad segments of the populations are still willing to support the party in elections. Contrary to its image as an anti-elite force, it has real experience of entering the governments. As a party rhetoric during the coronavirus crisis demonstrates, it seeks not just to accumulate votes of disaffected. Alternative for Germany, on the other hand, still remains a marginal status in the German political system. As the situation around the election of Kemmerich as Prime Minister of Thuringia showed, the system is not simply not prepared to normalize the status of the party, but also punishes individual attempt to go against this decision. A characteristic feature of the right populist parties noted in this paper is the nature of their internal structure. Forces united by protest idea begin to diverge on private issues. More radical groups clash with moderate. Finally, conflicts sometimes arise around charismatic figures, playing leading roles in such parties. Then, due to various circumstances, charismatic leaders leave their positions in big right populist parties. They often try to establish, as happened with Petri and Strache, but they rarely achieve significant success. In the case of Austrian and German right-wing parties confirm another frequently mentioned feature of right-wing populism, namely the ability to achieve greatest electoral successes against the background of central consensus, as it happened in 1960s or in mid-2010s, with silence on marginal issues in both countries. The first interaction between the German and Austrian right described dates back to 1980s when the German Republicans and Austrian Freedom Party jointly participated in a technical cooperation project initiated by the National Front. In 1990s, the Republicans started to invite the National Front to participate to their own events. Such visits are thought to have fueled the internal divisions among the German right, some of whom sought to move closer to moderate voters, while others sought to remain loyalty to their anti-elitist status. The external aspirations of the German and Austrian right quickly became markedly different. While one traditionally sought to take on the role of teachers and initiators of large-scale cross-border interactions, the German right only intermittently joined the formats created by the others. In its efforts to fuel competed with the French counterparts, while clearly following the aforementioned of Miguel Almeida on the relationship between the internal dynamics of the party status. As the analysis of the rhetoric of the Austrian Freedom Party and its current state development of this paper demonstrates, the Austrian right still appeals to the common we, which embraces the Austrian nation rather than being locked in its own party, in contrast to the German right, which is more focused on high-level problems and their principal intransferability. The Austrian right pays more attention to the local issues and its possible involvement in solving the existing problems. In summary, the main conclusions we drew from our research are as follows. Firstly, despite the synonymity of approaches in a number of extreme German right-wingers, based their identification on international units, in case with Austria, the we nation identification is particularly strong in case of Germany's we dissidents, and don't form stable cross-border communities in accordance with what Benjamin de Kleen theorizes. Secondly, the case studies support the thesis that the normalization of the right-wing populist party, its acceptance by the political system as an integral part of it, contributes to a shift in the party's focus towards low-level issues and a reduced interest in cross-border contacts. Hence, the third conclusion is that the difference in status between the accepted and rejected right-wing parties became a significant barrier to their cooperation. It seems that in the near future, as predicted by Richard Strauss in his 2000 paper, the predominant form of cooperation will continue with informal contacts. At that's all. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Question for the council members. Do we have any questions to the applicant strictly on her presentation? Not more than 2 minutes per question. No. Okay, then let us proceed to speeches of the council members and their assessment of the thesis and external reviews, if any. Let me remind you that the applicant may answer all the questions together after all the reviews have been presented, or what do you prefer? Would you like to answer all questions? I would rather answer each reviewer individually. We have not received any external reviews, so let us proceed to reviews of the council members. Since all the reviews were published at St. Petersburg University website, I suggest we focus on the key issues, comments or questions. Do council members have any objections to that? No. In any case, you still have no more than 10 minutes, please. I suggest we let's do it in the alphabetical order. I suggest we start with Natalia Alekseevna Vasileva. Thank you. So it was very interesting for me to read this thesis. Indeed, we see certain revival of the right trends in Europe, and not only in Europe. So the topic is certainly relevant. Besides, I think the author managed somehow to demonstrate the unique features of the party structure, ideology, the differences between the German and Austrian rights, which is very valuable for us because as observers, so this information is very important. Indeed, results obtained by the author have practical and scientific significance, and it seems that conclusions of the thesis can become the basis for the study of a wide scope of issues of contemporary Europe. My review was published, as was mentioned, at the university website, so I'll not talk about the content, so I'll proceed straight to the remarks, which hopefully the applicant will talk about. So first, so here are my remarks and questions. So first of all, on page 10, the applicant talks about novelty, and where she speaks, she says that the case of trans-border cooperation of the Austrian and Austrian populists, yet there's no explanation of the author's understanding of this issue. Further, the author mentions innovative approach which combines a formal attention to organizations, agreements and institutionalized cooperation, and informal attention to emerging identities and shared concepts. So these two approaches to the party interactions, but at that there's no clear definition of efficiency of this method of combination. Second, the goal of the thesis is stated as the need to identify what degree the party views promote or prevent effective cross-border contacts. That's page 5. According to conclusions, cross-border party cooperation at this stage has never occurred because prevailing form of cooperation in the nearest future will be informal contacts of individual persons. That's stated on page 128. So that means that the negative result of trans-border cooperation calls for more clear author's explanation, otherwise quoting experts. Yet these comments are of specific and merely recommendations and do not affect the overall positive assessment of the thesis. I think that the thesis by Anastasia Strakevich, prospects of transnational cooperation of the extreme right populates on the example of Alternative for Germany and Austrian Freedom Party, corresponds to the main requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees in Petersburg University, and the applicant deserves being awarded the degree of candidate of political science, specialty 554, international relations. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anastasia, Alekseevna. So you have 20 minutes in total, so you're going to have about approximately 4 minutes for each question. Thank you, Natalia Alekseevna, for your questions and your question about novelty and conclusions. And indeed, I'd like to focus more on the remark about the advantages of such combined approach. Indeed, in the introduction, I did not describe the advantages of the approach, and I did this in the theoretical part, where I explained the choice of the constructivist paradigm, and without denying formal contacts, we believe it's necessary to look at such issues as identity and shared concepts. And we believe that shared identities and concepts about each other could become the basis for deeper cooperation despite existing differences, and understanding of our role, and the role of populists is the foundation about the negative prospects of cooperation. I think that's it. Thank you. Next. Thank you. Next review. I'd like to give the floor to Zeleneva Irina Vladimirovna. Thank you very much for giving the floor. My review is also available, so I'll just focus on the key issues. I think the thesis Anastasia Strakevich is written on a relevant theme, the problem of populism in Latin America, discussions in the economic community. Certainly, so there is no universal understanding. They prove relevance of this. There are few works dedicated to this topic. There are many works on definition of populism, transnational cooperation, much fewer works dedicated to that. I'd like to say that the strong points of the thesis. First of all, I like the methodological foundations chosen by the author, such methods as comparative analysis and content analysis of the text. The author applied the method very well in the study of documents, where she identified three theme units: immigration politics and policy, refugee policies, foreign policy, and identification of parties and their vision of challenges. The four propositions of the thesis, so it has over 4 annexes, demonstrate coherence and relevance of such conclusions. So content analysis helps the author to achieve her goals. What else I liked? In the introduction, we find a chapter on sources, and I understand that this is not relevant for this specialty, but it's very important that the author can work well with the sources, puts them into 5 groups, such as program documents, official sites, party websites, mass media, and party meetings, protocols, etc. So 150 sources. That's very important, and also they serve an excellent foundation for the study, and their analysis enable the author to make in-depth and objective conclusions. As it appears, the most interesting part of the thesis are chapters 3 and 4, where the author analyzes alternative journalist parties and stages of its development, identify their position, attitude with foreign sources, European integration and migration. We may agree with the conclusions made in these chapters. Also, the author concludes that the form of cooperation, the prevailing form of cooperation, will be informal context. But of course, as in any thesis, there are some points that I'd like the author to maybe clarify, maybe some critical remarks or maybe questions that are not that remain unclear. First is, what key issues would you highlight in the Alternative and Austrian Freedom Party programs? Second, do party influence EU foreign policy making? And finally, what, in conclusion, you say that the main form of predominant form of cooperation will be informal individual contacts. What are the reasons for this forecast? But in general, the thesis by Anastasia Strakevich, prospects of transnational cooperation of extreme white populists, corresponds to the main requirements set by the order dated the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1 on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant, Anastasia Strakevich, deserves awarding the degree of Candidate of Political Sciences, specialty 554, International Relations. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you. Thank you, Irina Vladimirovna. Anastasia Alekseevna, the floor is yours. Thank you, Irina Vladimirovna, for paying attention to my work and for your critical remarks. Let me answer your questions. As for the structure of the program documents, by their structure, their programs are not different by the centrist party. They have sections, for example, on environmental agenda, health, economy, law enforcement, and foreign policy. However, the content is different. As for the Alternative for Germany programs, they are more value-based. The emphasis is not on procedures and methods of overcoming problems, but on the fundamental flaw of the existing system, its unsustainability and unacceptability. On this basis, the main issue is the Alternative for Germany program should probably be the democratic deficit. This is not the case with Austrian Freedom Party. There's no greater emphasis on practice and improvement of the existing system. In 2017, national relations, Austrian Freedom Party formulated a crisis of justice, which distinguishes it from the Alternative for Germany, and what it with the help is not denied by the party itself. As for the question on EU foreign policy making and their influences, both parties share the notion that the field of foreign and security policy should be associated exclusively with the national level and oppose deeper integration in this field due to the current format of the existence of common foreign policy in which the national states are the main actors. We believe it's most correct to speak of the right-wing populist influence on European policy through implementation of certain actions at an international level. In the case of Freedom Party, which has more power, one of the most noticeable foreign policy decisions made under the influence of the Freedom Party was Austria's refusal to join the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Legal Migration. The Austrian government then stated that the instrument implied recognition of human right to immigrate. The Austrian government was one of the few EU members to oppose this document. By entering into a coalition with a Freedom Party, the Austrian People's Party agreed with the right-wing populists the following basic attitude: leaving the US is not considered, but Brussels' competences should be limited to certain already agreed areas. And another example, in March 2018, then explosion of Russian diplomats was on the agenda because of the so-called Skripal case. A disagreement arose within the Austrian People's Party. Should we remain neutral, as Freedom Party insisted, or stand in solidarity with those EU members who went along with the expulsion? In the end, the expulsion did not take place. As for the influence of Alternative for Germany on foreign policy is worthy of a separate multi-page study. Thus, in recent weeks, advocating the adoption of fair quota of refugees by European, the German government has obviously taken into account the strong domestic opposition to such a decision represented by the Alternative Party. Hence, the narrative of lessons learned in 2015. The hypothesis can be formulated as follows. On the one hand, the alternative factor strengthens the resolve of their political opponents but their position of alternative is declared unreasonable and therefore not worth attention. On the other hand, in their desire to dismiss such views, the centrist parties invariably take a look on its existence and the issues labeled by it as painful. I thank dear council members for these ideas for further research, and I will continue. And finally, the question on reasons why informal contact by individuals will remain the predominant form of cooperation. First, the attempts to deepen cooperation. First, attempt to deepen cooperation by limiting them to a formal frame would force the parties to engage in a dialogue on a wider range of issues, making their divergence of positions more obvious as of their future. Second, there is the occasional toxicity of external contacts for domestic policies. Here, as mentioned by Dmitry Almeida, here the contradictions between growing support, awakening interest and active integration into the existing political system and the need to maintain an appropriate degree of critical discourse that attracts this support comes into play. And finally, there also seems to be a psychological factor. Charismatic leaders are willing to take the initiative in interactions and find it difficult to accept others taking the lead. That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Alexander Suvorov's review. It was interesting for me to read the thesis because the topic of populists is indeed relevant today, especially when one of our prominent populists has just passed away. Just happened that way. And of course the relation with the German populist in two German-speaking states is very interesting. And this relation between the more experienced Austrian party with the more recent and less accepted German party has its own features. I'd like to mention the obvious achievement of the author, the analysis, and so the core of the thesis indeed is sort of political approaches. I mean that the fact that the author has analyzed the texts, a great number of texts, both of official documents and on the internet, official speeches, with the help of contemporary content analysis tools, and that is very important. So primary information processed very well, so which is important for international research. So these are real studies, and I think, in my opinion, that is very important. So the main materials, and as I said, what was the obstacles to interaction of the old established and new parties is not preventing them from cooperation. So it was more important that the party is being incorporated in the political system, and so the more attention is devoted to internal issues and population-related problems. So, which is interesting when the party becomes incorporated into the political system, its rhetoric changes, and while they pay attention not to the global level, but pay more attention to the local population, and while they assume an important role of exercising control over the government, and thus start playing an important role. So that is, in my opinion, interesting material, provides interesting material for analysis. And so this information can be useful, also be interesting to German Foundation colleagues. Abandoning radical opinions of such parties. So obviously, one of the main conclusions is that if the system resists, a party that can become more and more radical and go beyond the existing norms. So that's a very important conclusion, which is relevant. I have several questions, actually two. So my first question, or maybe a suggestion, is that their own material on text is given in annexes could be included in the main text as diagrams or schemes. So that's a suggestion. So why keep such valuable material in the appendix? And I think that's also a good suggestion, valuable suggestion, can be valuable in the future. And second, my second question or remark is, so the Russian readers, so most of us would be interested in the analysis of similarities and differences in their positions of their attitude to Russia and leadership. It's mentioned briefly in but I'd like to the author to pay more attention to this issue, since this question would be of interest to us. So for me, but I missed that. But apart from that, well, the thesis appears to be a complete piece of research which complies with all the necessary regulations, including novelty. And in conclusion, obviously, this work complies with the main regulations set by the orders, and the applicant, Anastasia Alekseevna Strakevich, deserves awarding the degree of Candidate of Political Science, specialty 554, International Relations. Thank you. Alexander Yurevich, thank you. Anastasia Alekseevna, please. Thank you, Alexander Yurevich, for your comments and suggestions. I fully agree that better integration of tables given in the appendix would make my study more valuable. I will certainly try to consider this in my future publications. And as for the attitude of the Alternative and Freedom Party to Russia, I certainly agree that this topic would make my thesis more relevant and more interesting to the Russian readers and to academic community. Both parties have been accused in the past of excessive sympathy for Moscow and of being funded from Moscow. And members of both parties have visited Moscow and met with Russian political elite. For example, Hans Christian Strache visited Russia in 2014, and Alexander Gauland and Patrice von Stroh in 2018. There were also some meetings held in Europe, while Russian media published positive statements. At the same time, the German-speaking participants did not talk much about the content of such meetings and preferred to focus on the importance of de-ideologized approach to international relations and recognize Russia's right to disagree with the Western policies. Nevertheless, after the 2019 scandal, the toxicity of relations with Moscow increased significantly. And although this became an internal political issue, and because of that, the Alternative Party reduced its contacts with Russian colleagues, and in the Austrian Freedom Party maintained official contacts with Russia. Thank you. That's all. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Aygerim Nurlivna Ospanova. Thank you very much. The thesis to review on prospects of transnational cooperation of extreme right-wing populists, the case of Alternative for Germany and Austrian Freedom Party. The theme of political populism is still relevant. The issues of terminology and political practice have not been clearly defined, and the relation of populism and programs of various political parties is not yet clear. The subject requires careful study, comparative analysis. That's why this thesis allows to check this political phenomenon, theoretical approaches, and specific practical examples. Besides, the authors talking about cross-border cooperation, which is always difficult. So we're talking about the right populists, and their work is well structured and logical. The author starts from the terminology framework, and the chapter 4 on mutual perception appears to be most interesting. The author demonstrates good command of various works, and while a small party is dedicated to cooperation between the right-wing populists. Also, the author contributes to the understanding of the growing popularity of populism and such clear understanding which are often confused, such as the relation between populism and right-wing radicalism. All the conclusion of the author are verified and based on the study of political programs of the party. The study is based on 102 sources, and total number of sources in literature is 159. And at that, the author has conducted a high-quality methodological work, which is reflected in many tables in the appendix. The author concludes that analysis of development of German and Austrian right-wing populists demonstrates sustainability of the phenomena itself. These parties have never disappeared from the political arena and demonstrated considerable successes against consensus between the largest parties. But I also have a number of questions. Is there any opportunity for cooperation of these parties with parties, relevant parties in post-Soviet states? What's the position of the greater Europe considering the US? And if there are any have they made any steps in Eurasian integration? In our opinion, there is certain reference to Russian political leader. That's why there's certain references to European integrations. The thesis by Strakevich and Anastasia, prospects of transnational cooperations of extreme right-wing populists, Alternative for Germany and Austrian Freedom, corresponds to the main requirements set by the order dated the 19th of November 2021, number 11181/1, the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the degree applicant Strakevich Anastasia Alekseevna deserves awarding the degree of candidate of political sciences, specialty 554, international relations. Articles 9 and 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated. Doctor of Political Sciences, Ospanova. Thank you. Please. Aygerim Nurlivna, thank you for your attention to the work and for your comments. Indeed, the Russian factor and Soviet factor is certainly present, and as I mentioned already today, I absolutely agree that including this information in my work, a wider scope would certainly improve my research. As for the possible cooperation with parties in the post-Soviet space, according to the open sources, these parties took part in events such as Multi-Family and the Future of Humanity, organized in 2014. However, we believe that both parties, Austrian and German, do not have independent ambitions in post-Soviet space. The right-wing populist Austrian Freedom Party, which advocates cooperation, is predominantly focused on EU states. In 2016, Austrian Freedom Party signed an agreement with the United Russia on mutual consultations and sharing experiences in the field of economic development and youth policies. At that time, Hans Christian Strache emphasized that his party was in favor of dialogue with Moscow and regretted that the EU and Russia imposed mutual sanctions. However, in December 2021, after the events of 2019, which Herbert Kickl said that the party will not extend its agreement, and this agreement has never actually been implemented. As for Eurasian integration, or Greater Europe, the building of Greater Europe, based on the evidence that we have, we believe that the issue of Eurasian integration does not feature predominantly in the rhetoric of German Austrian right-wing parties. Nevertheless, we thank the reviewer for this question, which provides an interesting vector for future research. Regarding the question of achieving a sustainable and acceptable order in Europe, at the heart of Alternative for Germany foreign policy stance is the idea to be guided by Germany's own national interests and not to follow in the favor of someone else's, for example, Americans' policies, to maintain pragmatic relations with Russia and to avoid interference in other states' affairs and the expansive interpretation of NATO's defensive role. In recent years, representatives of the Alternative Party have repeatedly pointed out that their speeches that the Eastern enlargement is perceived by Russia as a threat and therefore draws dividing lines in Europe. Meanwhile, the German right-wing populists do not have any coherent blueprint for European safety, confining themselves to criticism of the existing attitudes and occasional remarks about the possibility of the possible role of formats such as OSCE. The Austrian party has a slightly different approach, stressing, like their German colleagues, the importance of pragmatic relations with key actors in the global politics. The party prioritizes Austria's neutrality. Thank you. And finally, I shall present my review. I will not read all of it, just the key points. There are some Duke. My review is based on here I absolutely agree with my colleagues that the topic is highly relevant. It's relevant because in recent year we've seen a rise of the right-wing and extreme right mood views in Central Europe, and the fact that the Austrian Freedom Party, which until recently was a Swiss national party, are evidence of that, and the interaction of the Central European right-wing populist forces is relevant because in their countries these parties representing these moods have many supporters. The source materials is the source base is of the study is quite complete. There are programs, official documents of Austrian and German media, social media, parliament documents, which is also important, and of course the author has quite carefully analyzed national, international sources and ideology of extreme right-wing political forces. But, in my opinion, the best conclusions are found in Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 of the study, where the author indeed demonstrates the main stages of development of the right-wing movement in these states, the organizational principles of these parties, and the chapter on possible cooperation between the German and Austrian populists, which is immediately connected with the topic of the study, the attitude to cross-border cooperation among the German and Austrian right-wing populists. The Austrian party is more inclined towards international contacts, as can be seen in the case of Alternative for Germany, but also the relations, features of relation, and how the two political forces are, the role they play in the European right-wing movement. And regardless shared language, despite shared language, their cooperation occasionally runs into significant difficulties. And such comparative analysis of political settings of the two parties, and the author has thus demonstrated the similarities and differences in the approaches of these two parties to foreign policies, European building and history, and in 64% of cases in European Parliament, groups of Alternative for Germany and Austrian Freedom Party voted the same. So the prospects of cooperation between the two parties, well, there are some prospects considering their evolution, but considering their unequal political status, the author concludes that in the nearest future the contacts would be mostly limited to informal contacts. As for my comments or remarks, which are mostly recommendations, considering the thesis is a complete and independent study, I'd like to say that in the first chapter, where the author demonstrated that in recent years right and left-wing populism have emerged, which is actually true. But here, in some countries of Europe, so we noticed such interesting phenomena as centrist populism in Czech Republic and Italy, which is an interesting segment for the modern Europe. So that's just a clarification. Also, the author mentions the participation of the parties in various projects of European extreme wing movement, but considering that all these parties are involved in the activities of identity and democracy, though Alternative is associated member, it would be good to compare how both parties are using this factor. Speaking of trans-border cooperation. And finally, considering the name of the thesis, at what level are the relations between the regional organizations of Alternative Party and Freedom Party in Austria, considering that the two states border on each other, if local or regional organizations are paying any significant attention to this issue. Unfortunately, the author never mentions that. And finally, in the fourth chapter, when the author compares how European Parliament votes on different issues, it would be interesting, would be desirable to demonstrate what format of partnership or interactions in European Parliament there is, and so what are the prospects there. I understand this is a difficult issue, but the author has good command of the sources, so maybe as an additional answer she can possibly, perhaps she will be able to answer this question, because both parties are in the same group, members of the same group. But these critical remarks have no critical influence over the positive assessment of the thesis. The thesis by Anastasia Strakevich, prospects of transnational cooperation of extreme right-wing populist alternative for journalism of the Austrian Freedom Party correspond to the main requirements set on the 19th of November 2021 on the order of awarding academic degrees in Petersburg State University, and the degree of Strakevich and Alekseevna deserves awarding the degree of candidate of political science, specialty 554 international relations. So I presented, of the review was presented by me, Kostyuk Ruslan Vasilovich. Thank you, Ruslan Vasilovich, for your review and for your questions, and identifying several fields where I can develop where I can continue my studies. I also agree that despite the attention of most researchers today is focused on right-wing populism, indeed there are cases that do not fall between right and left wing and are of special interest to researchers. As for the fact if parties are involved in the activities of the Pan-European Identity and Democracy Party. In case of alternative, in our view, the main feature is incompatibility of aspirations of some members, such as former chairman of the delegation, with the party's course as a whole, while Moiten promoted growth of the course for exit from the EU, as make the alternative for Germany less desirable partner for the Central European Party. And Wilimski, head of the Austrian Freedom Party, emphasizes that the purpose was not to split the European Union or exit from the Union, but pressure on European bureaucracy to carry out reforms, including achieving what he calls true subsidiarity, combating illegal immigration, and moving towards greater democracy. From the perspective of the Austrian Freedom Party, the most beneficial cooperation is with parties with experience of being in power, as this increases the weight of the faction as a whole and its individual members. As for regional interactions, indeed I agree that some materials on the state of this level of interaction would enrich my thesis, yet there's interesting trend here. Though parties claim of strong leaders at different levels, such as Tyrol or Upper Austria, and are accompanied by participation in respective regional delegations, there are no reports of independent bilateral initiatives of regional nature. So all the initiatives are performed as interaction between the national parties, and we should mention previous experience of cooperation since 1990s. The German Republicans and the Free Democratic Party readily invited Austrian Freedom Party to their sessions, and this led to the division in the Stuttgart branch, Jürgen Haider, in 2004, the so-called Kronstadt Circle separated from the party, and so this. And here we should always remember staff migration among the German right-wing populists. And so they do not encourage excessive trans-border. So this thesis, this hypothesis is certainly preliminary, and I hope that in the future to explore this more in the future, to prove or deny this hypothesis. And finally, the level of partnership between party delegations. Both delegations abstain from openly commenting on mutual perceptions. We can only judge by indirect indicators, such as comments on specific topics of common interests. Joint statements are mainly concerned with broadly understood contours of the future. For example, confronting migration, avoiding pressure from Brussels on national sovereignty, and limiting the censoring competences of the digital giants. On the basis of the data we have analyzed, we conclude that for Alternative for Germany, the issue of democratic deficit plays a central role. At the same time, the deputies are more likely to talk about the fundamental problems, which is the basis for Germany's supposed exit from the EU, while the Austrian Freedom Party is more inclined to point not to problems but to the incapacity of the existing institutions to deal with the problems. Such divergence is, in our view, a significant negative factor that complicates a possible future convergence, while in the international ambitions of the German Freedom Party, this interest in cooperation with large German delegations, coordination of EU efforts will require more and more arrangements as interactions deepen, and so will call for more detailed agreements, which contradicts to the idea of exit from the EU. And of course, good material that could complement our study would be materials of interviews with members of the parties, and I hope to continue research in this field in the future. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues and council members, is everybody satisfied with Anastasia Alekseevna's answers? Yes, we are fully satisfied. I see. Speech is any of the attendees, anyone who's not a member of the council, is anybody willing to speak? Is anybody willing to speak? No. Questions received during this session regarding the content of the thesis and by way of feedback. We have not received any questions. Well, that's okay. Answers to questions, obviously. Since there are no questions, then let us proceed to the speech of Natalia Valerievna Yeromina, the thesis supervisor. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. So what Anastasia has is courage and professional attitude, because dealing with the populist topic of populism was a very brave move, and dealing with such practical concepts, because populism is a very complex phenomenon which has several components, and here we may see that Anastasia has put different views into a system and managed to focus on the aspects of the extreme right wing and their relations with populism. So this task has been solved in this thesis, which in my opinion is a very important contribution, makes an important contribution to our understanding of the topic of populism, external problems, and why such view on European integration. There was certain skepticism, and of course such existential problems as migration. They gave significantly increased the number of supporters of extreme right-wing populists, and of course these problems. Of course, now a new phase has started, and the relation and the attitude to Russia, the new vector. And so I think this thesis has created a strong basis, because the right-wing movement has grown stronger. And finally, such careful approach to such major issues, and also using the example of the experience of countries with the considering their Nazi past. So the view on genetic predisposition to certain problems, to certain challenges, and the ability to solve this problem, of course, are extremely important, not only from the point of research but practical activity. And here I think this work is certainly one of the best works in this field of in Russia, dedicated to this subject, and it has made a major contribution to dealing with complex tasks, because indeed there's lots of work, new vector, and it will be necessary. So now, Anastasia, you will have to work on that. I'd like to support this work, and I'd like to describe, say that Anastasia is very hardworking. Her careful approach, conscientious approach, and as her thesis supervisor, I say it was a pleasure to work with such students, such an excellent thesis. I can only thank Anastasia on my behalf. Thank you. Thank you. Well, dear colleagues, is anybody else willing to speak? Is anybody willing to speak? Then at that, I declare the discussion closed. And before we vote, let me ask the applicant and the council members, do council members have any, and the applicant herself, have any questions regarding the procedure of today's meeting, considering some members worked in the remote mode? Questions? No, we don't have any comments or questions. I see. Let us move on to the next item, which is voting. Dear colleagues, dear council members, before we vote, we may take a break to discuss the results, and the sound shall be switched off. What do you think? Do we need such a break to discuss the results? No, we don't. No, we are fine. We don't need a break. So if we don't need a break, let's continue. So each council member shall give his opinion independently and openly. Says 20 hours. If we don't need a break to discuss the results, so please. So we don't need a break, and after the break, okay, then let us vote. So please turn the sound on and make sure if we can all see and hear each other. Can you all see and hear each other? I put the question of awarding to Anastasia Strakevich the degree of candidate of political science, specialty 5 9. Please note that by voting for, each council member agrees that the applicant has not violated Article 11. In the thesis, the candidate for academic degree shall be obliged to refer to the author and source of borrowing such materials or individual results when using the results of scientific work performed by the applicant personally or in co-authorship. The applicant shall be obliged to mention this fact in her thesis. Let me remind you, the decision shall be considered positive if over a half, but not less than 3 members of the council members vote for it. According to Article 23 of the council member, Vasilieva Natalia Alekseevna, your opinion? I support awarding the degree. I think Anastasia deserves the degree. Zeleneva Irina Vladimirovna, your opinion? I support the thesis and I vote for awarding the degree to Anastasia Strakevich. Sungurov Alexander Yurovich? I vote for. Council member Aspanova Aigerim Nuralievna? I support. Thank you. And me, Chairman of the Council, Kostuk Ruslan Vasilovich, in accordance with my review, I vote for awarding the degree. Thus, dear council members, out of 5 council members present, 5 voted for, no one voted against, and nobody abstained. The decision to award to Anastasia Alexeyevna Strakevich the degree of candidate of political sciences, specialty 554, international relations, has been made. Let's give the floor to Anastasia Alexeyevna for her closing remarks. Thank you very much. I'd like to give my sincere thanks to all the council members, to their attention to my thesis, for your work, for your valuable comments that will help me to to continue my research. Let me thank my thesis supervisor, Natalia Valerievna Yeromina. Without her input, the work will not take the shape that it has. Thank her for her many years of support and invaluable recommendations she's given me. Also, I'd like to thank professors of the School of International Relations and Tomsk State University, where I studied. Faculty of these 2 departments supported me, helped me to take the first steps. Also, I'd like to thank my Dmitry Alexandrovich Lanko, with whom who was supervisor of my master's thesis. Also, I'd like to thank my family, who invariably supported me on this journey. And is not common to dedicate research to someone, but if I could dedicate my paper, I would dedicate this to Elza Vladimirovna Titova, my grandmother, whose example inspired me all my life. Thank you. Thank you. Let us congratulate me, and I declare the session closed. Thank you very much for participation. Please stop live broadcasting. Thank you.
Всего доброго.